and SAEDI Consulting Inc. So I know that you have a lot of choices that you can choose from a list of events, and thank you for joining with us. Together with, we have a lot of online participation as well. So as a start, I can introduce our two organizers.
Let me hold the microphone over.
To promote the development of intersectional gender expertise for professional practice, strengthen connections between gender theory, policy, and practice, support member collaboration, network building, mentoring, and leadership, foster the production and the dissemination of applied gender research, provide a platform for the exchange of gender information and resources, advance gender justice in member communities through coordinated feminist actions. So these are the things we do, and you can follow up on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. Do we have other?
What's it?
And you can also join our membership, and you can go to our official website. We will have a QR code in the end. And then is we're also what's up? With SAEDI Consulting.
There
you go.
Yeah. So SAEDI Consulting Inc. is an impact consulting firm creating social environmental issues creating social environmental solutions to build a more sustainable and inclusive world through their work with clients, including consulting firms, government, universities, and UN agencies in the Caribbean and internationally. Their goal is to promote and build a critical mass of work, thought, and action that eliminates the siloing of gender justice from environmental and climate justice, and to enhance the nexus between this in analysis, interventions, advocacy, as well as policy. And I believe you can hear more from Lisa in the later presentation. So that is an introduction of our two organizations, and I believe that in the online audience can see some information about our organizations in the chat. And to start with our conversation today, we would like to start with a short video.
30 years ago, the world came together in Beijing to declare that gender equality is not just a goal. It is fundamental to human rights and sustainable development. The Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action became a blueprint for a more just world. But today, those very rights are under attack. The Beijing Platform for Action had a clear message:
that human rights are women's rights, and women's rights are human rights once and for all.
The full implementation of the human rights of women and girls is an inalienable, integral, and indivisible part of all human rights and fundamental freedoms. Gender equality is essential to tackling poverty, promoting environmental protection, and social justice. But anti-gender movements today seek to dismantle these very rights. Anti-gender movements are not just resisting change. They are actively rolling back decades of progress. They oppose not only gender equity, but also racial justice, labor rights, LGBTQ+ protections, and democratic freedoms. Their attacks are systemic, coordinated, and global. We are the inheritors of Beijing's vision and the defenders of its future. Gender professionals, feminist activists, and climate justice leaders are uniting to resist oppression, advocate for policies that protect all people, and ensure that the promises of Beijing are not just remembered, but fulfilled. Welcome to Countering Anti-Gender Movements, Intersectional Solutions for Gender and Environmental Equity. 30 years after Beijing, we are here to strategize, resist, and build a future that is inclusive, sustainable, and just.
To offer this video, I'm glad to introduce Alyssa for our next presentation.
Thank you, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. And so first I want to congratulate Lou on the great video to start us off. And very welcome to see everyone here. Great. All right, cool. So today we find ourselves at a very important juncture, I think, in a number of areas, particularly when we look at the movement, to achieve and sustain gender equality, because I don't think we can achieve without looking at the sustainability of it. At this particular point, we are faced with the fact that sustaining the progress on gender equality and a number of elements of empowerment are definitely challenged, if not being undermined. And we also need to recognize that this is not new. We've faced this from the beginning and even before probably we started or even thought of starting a movement. Gender equality, labor rights, environmental justice are also deeply interconnected. And we see that all the time in our work when we're working on climate, environmental management, and natural resource management. What we often also see is that marginalized communities often bear the brunt of environmental impacts because of the structural gender issues, challenges, constraints, and barriers that exist across within societies and across countries and across communities. We often see within that they are exploitative labor conditions. There's a lot of unpaid work that is happening, not just by women, but by elderly persons, by young people, even by men sometimes as well, in terms of their contributions to environmental sustainability that then yields economic growth and economic prosperity. In the midst of all of this, we're also seeing very targeted and very clear anti-gender policies and ideologies. Not somewhat and ironic, since the new words of the day are about gender ideology, and I'm still trying to find out what that actually means. As a person who likes to think that, I work on ideologies, I'm still trying to figure this one out. Why does this matter? So it's important for us to situate where all of this is coming from and what it affects. So yes, we focus a lot on gender, and a lot of the discussions today are on gender, but there are also other ways in which we describe ourselves. We think about our ethnicity or ethnicities, because many of us, including myself, are not just one thing. I may look like one thing, but I'm not. I come from Barbados, a post-slavery country. There's no way that I could be 100% Black. It's almost impossible. Race, again, presentation is not everything. Religion, region, all of these combine to define who we are. But they're also parts of the puzzle in terms of where this discussion on gender is coming from. And I guess if we say that there's an anti-gender movement, it suggests that a gender movement has power, because if there wasn't power, then there'd be no need to protest against it or to push back. So in some ways, that's a good compliment for us to have. The challenge is for us to figure out how we're going to push back. Young men are also being targeted with exclusionary and biased discourses, and sometimes being told, or it's being inferred that, gender equality and women's empowerment are the reasons for their lack of inclusion. Strange, because for them to be born and to get to 18, their mothers had to be empowered. So kind of strange that this would be a thing when you're an adult, but hey, one also assumes that they may have women in their lives. They may be working with women as well. So again, the logic is not always there in terms of how this actually becomes a thing. The status of women and gender-biased discrimination, gender-based violence, is a deep structural and inhibiting issue that affects all of our societies. We also know that we're facing increasing and more overt levels of sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. And these are definitely worsening the vulnerability of women, as well as gender diverse people who work in vulnerable environments. And this could be farms, this could be you know, in the fishing industry. This could be in a beautifully looking office. It happens everywhere. We also know that young people are being criminalized for advocacy and their actions around not just gender equality, but general issues of empowerment and inclusion. We all know that, you know, I guess, no, everyone in the world knows DEI as 3 letters. They may not know what it means, but no, it's very, very popular. And anti-DEI is now a thing as well. And so it's important to remember that DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion, or equality and inclusion, depends on where you're going. But DEI has never actually walked out. It's not a person, it's not a thing, it's an idea, not even an ideology. It's a process, it's an approach to try to address structural inequalities that do exist in our labor force, that do exist in our society. And in the context of this, it's hard to separate these social issues and cultural issues from climate and environmental issues, because the same people we're talking about live in these spaces, and they're also fighting for climate justice, particularly when they're faced with high costs that they cannot support by themselves, and they demand the support from those who are actually creating the problem, in their own words. Women have also been, and sometimes convinced, to be the spokesperson to talk about, and I will say this from my region, where are, you know, what are the phrases I hear? Where are the men? How about the men and the boys? You know, boys and men are being marginalized, or they're being excluded. Now, and I'm not saying that those are not issues. I just question marginalization, because as a social scientist, marginalization has a very specific meaning. It's a targeted thing. I don't think there's anybody out there trying to target men and boys. What we're saying is that we need to have a more equal society. And that will mean that, at least theoretically, there will be a small diminution of power. But even with all of this that's happening, it does not change our labor market statistics. It does not change the fact that gender-based violence is still generally driven by men on women. It doesn't mean that men are not victims, but I'm just saying that statistics bear out that you're still talking about a male on women gender-based violence phenomenon. And there are changes to that. There are also, we also know that violence between men also happens. And so it's important to make sure that we're talking around these issues, and that we're really understanding what's driving them, and therefore how we're going to actually find solutions. I think there is definitely a concern that about how the shifts of power will affect different people. We can't ignore this, and we can see the fact that ignoring it perhaps has been to our peril. But I think also, as a woman working in the gender space, I often say, before I start any training or while I'm in it, I start off my training not assuming that if I see a bunch of women that they're all about gender equality, because they're not. Or that everyone is for equality or democracy, because they're not. And so these naive assumptions that I think we have, have come full circle now, and we have to really address these. We are here at Beijing Plus 30, a very long road from 1995 to 2025. And while we've achieved quite a lot of progress in some very clear spaces, we recognize that the challenges are still there. And in some cases, they're even more pressing, because we understand how fragile our progress has become in some ways. And when we think about this, we think about the fact that there's increasing and overt backlash on gender equality that's happening in at least 25% of countries, that there's political polarization where, you know, we're literally picking camps around some of these issues. And so we're no longer working together to solve common and underlying problems, but we're now choosing which side, which means that we're splitting our force, and we're actually challenged to actually resolve the issues that exist. We also see that violence, abuse, and harm against women, we say here, but against a whole bunch of different persons and identities, are all rooted in deeply entrenched understandings of identity, about who's valued, who matters, whose rights are more important than others. These are fundamental issues that we're facing, and I think we need to be clear-eyed about them. Well, I mentioned that DI has been deleted. There are other things that are being deleted, climate, gender, etc. And we have to figure out, well, what are we going to do around some of these issues? How do we deal with the silencing or marginalization of voices? How do we position ourselves in a debate that definitely is about power and control, and as well as influence? Patriarchal and systemic inequalities are there. Patriarchal forces, misogynistic forces are not going anywhere. In fact, they may feel even more empowered than ever. And we have to think about how we're going to be able to address these. In the midst of this, it's hard to deny that transgender bias has also become a bit of a clarion call for an anti-gender discussion, ways of talking about the fact that DEI has gone too far, and a number of other issues as well. How do we grasp back the narrative? I think it's going to be one of our challenges. I was having a discussion this week with two colleagues, and there were issues coming up about, well, did we go too far on some things? And so I think we do have to be reflective, but we also have to look at the fact that there are going to be ways in which we address this through a gender equality lens, but there are also going to have to be ways in which we address it through a climate, natural resource, and environmental lens, because these issues are fundamental to the empowerment for the people that we're fighting for. Women, LGBTQIA+ individuals, persons with disabilities, and Indigenous communities are all part of this parcel. And in some cases, we are fighting potentially for persons who are all of these things. And often our policies, our approaches, our strategies do not consider that people are complex and have multiple identities. Sometimes we pick one, because we like to think simply. I understand the temptation, but the reality is that nothing about our lives is simple. Even when we think that we fit within the so-called norm. And so we need to think about how we're also going to adjust our ways of doing things. There is good research out there from UNDP, UN Women. I wouldn't go through all of it, but the figures are concerning. And they tell us in some very clear ways some of the things that we have to do. And they tell us about some of the entry points that we will have to tackle. If we're thinking about solutions, therefore, we have to think about how we're going to be partnering with organizations. I work in the private sector, but I've always said, if I'm going to be working in gender equality, it's hard to think that I'm going to be a corporate baroness and not also have some activism as part of my work. How do you do that when you're working on gender equality? Can I just completely separate myself from NGOs and CSOs when I'm working on gender equality, and when I actually rely on them for information for my work, but also in terms of accessing the groups that I need to meet with? It's impossible. And so in terms of an agenda for change, I think we need to think, and hopefully this is a start today, of finding spaces where we can bring people together, not necessarily all of us agreeing on everything, but to have conversations. Conversations are key before we even start talking about solutions. I firmly believe that. We have to think about how we're going to resist the backlash and not fall into further traps. Because in some cases, I think we have to admit we have fallen into traps over the last 10 to 20 years. How do we make sure that the data is working to prove? We know that data does not solve everything. We know that everything is not about logic, but there are some people who like data, and therefore we have to have it. We also need to foster meaningful participation. And when we say that, we need to really think about what it means. So when we say meaningful participation, I sometimes wonder if I'm perhaps the best person to be here, because I'm probably not facing any of these challenges, really. You need somebody who actually is facing these challenges. I mean, I am to a certain extent, but certainly not at a fundamental level. I'm still living a pretty decent life. You need someone who's actually in the trenches, really digging through, and really is facing these things on an ongoing, probably minute by minute basis. And so we need to think about how we're going to get those voices at these tables, and how we're going to be able to partner with them in overt and less overt ways, because people are scared, and we have to acknowledge and appreciate the fact that they're concerned about their safety. I will end there. I think that we've got a great gathering online and in the room, and I'm really looking forward to what you all have to say. Thank you. Sorry, my 50-something-year-old eyes are not as strong as they were at 25, so the computer had to come a little closer.
Can I take over the microphone?
Yeah, there's a whole process though.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for that extremely important context for today's discussion.
Is it on?
Can you all hear me well?
No, I mean, you're loud, but it's not through the microphone.
Yeah, you have to
Yeah.
get closer to the problem.
Yeah, there's a
You
whole
probably get
process.
microphone out of the stand.
There you go.
There
There.
it is.
Can't move it. It's off.
Yeah, don't touch it, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa. So before we dive into our panel discussion, just
Turn this one off.
Okay, we use this one? Yeah. That might be easier.
Yeah.
Great. I did want to go over some community safety norms before we dive into our panel discussion for the day, to help us have a congenial environment for learning and exchange. Let us agree to foster a safe and inclusive learning environment here today. Any form of violence, including threats, harassment, or disruptive behavior, such as talking over others, abusive interruptions, or personal attacks, will not be tolerated. We will practice mutual respect and treat each other with dignity and consideration.
This is an anti-racist space, meaning that we welcome, value and respect an intersectional approach to feminism. And then I ask that we seek permission before following up with someone about what they have shared here in the room today. We avoid taking photos or screenshots, especially with participant names and pictures, or using AI bots for note-taking. No recording of any kind and no live streaming, please, except from the event organizers. We ask that you share space with a sense of awareness, recognize and address power dynamics and privileges within this group. Finally, the event organizers reserve the right and responsibility to remove anyone who does not adhere to these guidelines and principles. And I must flag that we have dedicated members from the event organizing team, as well as NGO CSW security staff, who will promptly remove any disruptors from this venue and report them to the NGO CSW. Some housekeeping. We are recording this meeting. If you're joining online and have confidentiality concerns, please turn off your camera and anonymize your name. To change your name, you can click on the 3 dots on the top right of your Zoom box and then click rename. For folks in this room, you may refrain from identifying yourself during the Q&A to maintain confidentiality. The folks online, you can turn on captions at the bottom of your Zoom screen, which are available in 35 languages. And please use the Zoom chat function to drop your questions as we progress with the discussion. We will be compiling your questions and presenting them to our panelists at the end for some responses. And folks in the room, we will have some support from the volunteers to collect your questions and pose them to panelists at the end. Yeah, so we will be sharing recording and materials from today's event with everyone who's registered. So I would love to pose the first set of questions to our panelists. And we are being joined, 3 of our panelists are joining online. So I'll take the liberty to introduce them briefly. We have Angelique Nixon, who is a Black queer writer, scholar, and activist, born and raised in the Bahamas. She has lived and worked in Trinidad and Tobago for over 10 years. Her research and creative work are widely available. She's author of poetry and art chapbook called Saltwater Healing, and a scholarly award-winning book called Resisting Paradise. Angelique is a senior lecturer at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies at the University of West Indies in Trinidad and Tobago. And she's also director of a feminist LGBTQI organization called CAISO in Trinidad and Tobago. Great. So in addition to Angelique, we are joined by Yemi Knight, who is a Barbadian advocate for environmental and human rights, dedicated to advancing inclusive and equitable solutions for today's pressing challenges. As a passionate conservationist and justice-driven leader, Yemi has successfully spearheaded Caribbean environmental and LGBTQI+ advocacy campaigns. With over 7 years of experience in consulting, research, project management, Yemi has worked at the intersection of climate justice, human rights, community resilience, ensuring that marginalized voices are centered in decision-making. And finally, our third panelist online is Shri Vidya Verma, who is an amazing colleague, is an employment lawyer from India, whose practice is focused on conducting impartial workplace investigations and providing anti-harassment and bullying training. She's associated with the Society for Gender Professionals as a circle co-lead for Ending Workplace Sexual Harassment Circle since 2018. This circle fosters collaboration and knowledge sharing around prevention of sexual harassment in the workplace, and brings together discussions and best practices from its global community of almost 150 members from 45 countries to enhance workplace safety and support. So I'm going to turn over to our panelists online first for the first segment of this discussion. So my question is, first of all, focused on manifestation of anti-gender movements and its impacts. So how are anti-gender movements currently manifesting within your field of gender work? Have you noticed a shift in these movements, especially in the past few months? How have recent government actions in the US and globally influenced these changes, either generally or particularly in the environmental justice space? And it will also be helpful if you can dissect the impact of these movements at the individual, community, organization, and society level. So that's the set of prompts, and over to Yemi first for your remarks, and then we'll pass on the mic to Angelique and Shrivika. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, thanks for the introduction, and hello everyone in the chat. I see 97 people here, and so I'm glad you all made the time today to hear from us. So I'll jump right in. My work covers both human rights and environmental justice. And I will speak first about when Barbados became a republic back in 2021. At that point, I was a part of an LGBTQ coalition, and the Barbadian government allowed for private interest groups, CSOs, individuals to make suggestions for the new formation of the Constitution. So our goal was to include gender identity, sexual orientation, and gender expression as protections in the Charter and the new Constitution. Immediately, we saw some backlash from anti-right groups, which primarily focused on global North right-wing ideologies. So they were heavily influenced by anti-vax movement, the removal of gender neutrality from laws, and they were also particularly interested in child's rights, but primarily on the front of comprehensive sexual education. All of these things they were fighting up against weren't necessarily had anything to do with the Constitution, but also wasn't relevant to the Barbadian context, in that we didn't have any transgender bathroom issues. We don't have any, there's nothing in the pipeline to have comprehensive sexual education. So what it really did was derail the work that the LGBTQ coalition was doing. However, it's likely that by the end of the year, we're gonna see gender and sexual orientation included as protections. On the climate front, as it pertains to the Constitution, we had no issues there. However, in my personal work, and I've worked with Lisa before, I have written policy briefs, I've written a policy brief with the International Organization for Migration, and that was to include LGBTQ safeguards in evacuation planning. And in that front, that's where I faced most difficulties, and this is obviously due with all the imported right-wing ideologies, whereby if I include LGBTQ rights into discussions, conversations are immediately derailed, and I'm sometimes unable to get meaningful and practical solutions. And I also learned that in some government institutions, it is mandated that if certain marginalized groups are not explicitly protected in the Constitution or certain laws, they have no will to include those protections when it comes to evacuation or emergency management systems. So that is a challenge I've encountered. I also want to touch on the tech space, where we see now tech giants being able to shift political ideologies or influence political ideologies using technology, whether it be algorithms, et cetera, et cetera. So on both fronts, when it comes to anti-gender, anti-rights movements, but also the rollback of climate consciousness, right? You know, it was widely understood that climate change is indeed real, but we're seeing this rollback, at least from people with the fiscal power to make certain changes. But this also means that certain NGOs and CSOs who were funded by these corporations or individuals are now scampering to find funding. So I myself felt that in part, I lost around, what was it, $84,000 this year for a project that I wanted to do to further expand on my research. So now I need to figure out how to find that funding. So that's a real life situation where my work has been impacted, and it shows the instability of human rights advocacy in that funding can disappear overnight. Anyway, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenny. We can go to Angelique next. And thank you so much for staying on time. We have 4 minutes for everyone to share their remarks.
I will do my best to be on time, and you can signal me. So I want to share a few things in response to this important question. For me, the anti-gender movements have manifested across my fields of work in which I'm involved, from teaching and research in gender and development studies and sexuality studies to LGBTQI+ activism, and across gender, sexual, climate, and climate justice work through civil society, organizing, and social movements. The anti-gender movement, I think, is important to situate it also as a part of a larger anti-rights moment that we're in, and the movements and attacks on social justice advancements and the backlash that we are experiencing. They perpetuate, in particular, false and misleading information about sex, gender, sexuality, human rights, and climate change. I want to talk in particular about anti-gender movements fueling trans panic. We've seen that happening, the anti-LGBTQ sentiments, homophobic and transphobic attitudes and discourses. And these negatively affect public understandings of gender and sexuality, identity, sexual and reproductive rights, especially. And they've influenced public discourse and legislation over the past few years that we see restricting human rights and spreading fear-based narratives. They're driven by political, conservative, and religious bodies that frame understandings of gender as a threat to social good. And increasingly, it seems that any progressive position on justice, be it social, racial, gender, economic, migrant, disability, climate, or ecological, is understood as threatening and destructive to the dominant global order. White supremacist, capitalist patriarchy being that dominant order, which can sustain itself only through division, fear-mongering, and beliefs that the market will fix everything. And so in responding to the question about the most recent assaults we see happening across, very focused attacks on race, economic, gender, and climate justice, escalated through these executive orders with dizzying impacts over the last 3 months. We see this through the establishing of so-called, binary two-gender policies, attempts to erase trans and gender diversity, criminalizing migrants, defunding development, eliminating environmental protections, expanding extractivist industries, abolishing DEI, and thereby civil rights and racial and economic justice, to the destruction of public education. It's been incredibly frightening, terrifying, and dangerous. We are living in times that from the United States, these are having far-reaching impacts. And globally, we've also seen the push to right-leaning politics that have similar tenets that are anti-rights, anti-immigrant, anti-gender, and in climate denial. And so I wanted us to think about all of these forces, how they are working together. I don't think it then makes sense. And when we see the list of words that have been banned, that they are all a part of our social justice movements and environmental justice movements that we have been working towards for decades, right? They have the language, they have our words, and they are wielding attacks on us. And I think, like someone said earlier, that our movements have been so powerful, and that's why the anti-backlash can be so powerful. So I want to close by talking specifically, I think one of the things too that our work has done, because we've made that analysis, the analysis that we've made possible through anti-colonial, decolonial, and queer feminist activism and research. We've made in the last 2 years, it's been so much public information about the connections between climate-induced conflicts, the exploitation of people and land for resources, and the violation of human rights and displacement of people. We think about the activism and attention to Sudan, to Congo, to Palestine, to Haiti. And so I think it is no wonder that colonial and imperial powers are attempting to dismantle any focus on justice or understandings of historical injustices and inequalities. And the call for reparations has also put forward new energy. And so I think we see this doubling down in attack. I think I've hit my 4 minutes, but
Yes.
I have, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. I'll stop there. Yeah.
Awesome. We'll go to Vidya next. Please share your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm very happy to be part of this panel discussion today. As the introduction said, I serve as the Circle co-chair for Ending Workplace Sexual Harassment Circle. Today, I'm going to share some of the insights that came out from the Circle consultations, and we particularly wanted to examine it through the lens of ending workplace sexual harassment. These are some of the ideas that we collated, and we are presenting it before you. So we have been seeing across the world, from Europe to Asia to US, there are critical challenges because of the fund cuts, and particularly targeting towards gender equality. So this has resulted in vital work being ending almost any kind of gender-based the work that needs to go into ending gender-based violence, mitigating climate change, and creating more opportunities for women. So, for example, last 5 years alone, if we can look at it, and we have seen unprecedented cuts. For example, in 2020, UK made about £4 billion reduction in aid that was going to fund programs targeting women, and it has the funding has come down almost half from 2019 to 2022. So Sweden, for example, abolished its feminist foreign policy and halved its funding for development work in 2023. Obviously, the most recent and most highlighted event that has happened is in US, where unprecedented attack and elimination of US aid. It has actually cut all US foreign assistance, including significant work that is being currently done across the world to eliminate gender-based violence and harassment. Other countries following its footsteps, particularly from the right-wing government front, like Japan, Netherlands, etc., are also, catching up with this, I should say. So also, we discussed about the recent attack on diversity and inclusion, diversity, equity, and inclusion in workplace programs, which actually level the playing field for women and minorities and ensure that they have same opportunities. It creates more challenges for addressing sexual harassment, particularly sexual harassment at workplace, and leave women more vulnerable than ever. So all these cuts are having urgent and most severe implications. Domestic violence prevention organizations also, particularly in US, shuttering because there is funding freezes and they're no longer able to provide services. Funding reduction policy shifts underscore the vulnerability of these programs, particularly in preventing sexual harassment and gender-based violence. So it is also very significant for climate change from the climate change perspective. So obviously the connection everyone has been making in their submissions, natural disasters, as climate change and disasters intensify, particularly women face heightened risk in order to access food and water, and there is increased economic instability. There is increased fueling of domestic violence. There is destruction of livelihoods, and all of this making women and vulnerable communities particularly challenging in dealing with these scenarios. These are causing needless suffering and aggravating the risk of sexual harassment and gender-based violence in every facet of life. But we are really hopeful that we can discuss and come up with some strategic responses and how we can all come together and fight against these movements, particularly through this session. Thank you.
Feminist advocate with extensive experience in gender-based violence, prevention, grassroots activism, and international development, collaborating with organizations such as the World Bank and the Organization of American States. She currently serves as a human rights researcher for the Monitor Marielle Franco at Mondosur, an organization dedicated to documenting hate crimes against LGBTQ+ individuals in Latin America and the Caribbean. Additionally, she co-leads a fabulous community of practice, the Employment and Peer Support Circle at SGP, as well as SGP's strategic advocacy efforts at the United Nations. Welcome, Violeta. So glad to be hearing from you today.
Thank you, Aparna, and thank you everyone who's joining here in person and also everyone who is joining online. I hope you can hear me well. So the first question, the first part of this session is that we're trying to think about how anti-gender movements are manifesting in our fields of work and the places that we experience personally and professionally. And actually, I've been doing research on anti-gender movements for a while, and I've been working to understand how they work, the strategies that they use, and the dynamics that they have. Because I think that at the same time that I would love them not to exist, I think that it's still fascinating to try to understand how and why they work. And from my research and my experience working in international organizations and also as a feminist at a national level in Paraguay, I've noticed that they use a two-level strategy. And this strategy is attacking gender advancing norms and policies and laws, first at a national level, well, simultaneously at a national level and at an international level as well. And at a national level, what they do is that they resist or push back against the advancements that are in place on gender-related laws and policies, or also human rights. And they use this discourse that these are foreign impositions and a way of modern colonialism. And what they are doing is that they are defending national sovereignty. So that's part of the discourse that they use. And also, of course, that they also use what other panelists have been saying, that they create moral panic and they spread fear. They use our language. They use the language of children's rights or family rights or parents' rights. And to give some examples, in my country, in Paraguay, we've seen the prohibition of the word gender in every level of education since 2017. And we've also seen that we passed a law to address violence against women, but the word gender is not in the law. So this law is a law that criminalizes in a comprehensive way violence against women and feminicide, but the word gender doesn't exist in the law. And other things that I have seen in my research is that they are not only focusing on issues that are very polarizing, like abortion or same-sex marriage or LGBTQ rights, but they have been more recently focusing on things that seem to be gender neutral, because nothing is gender neutral, such as democracy with gender parity laws, or even national security, when they were able to push back, for example, against the peace efforts in Colombia, also in 2017. So they have a lot of power in the region of Latin America. They work in a transnational way. They are very organized. And these are some of the strategies that they use at the national level. And also they work very actively at the international level. They actually imitate what we've been doing since 30, 40 years. They imitate the transnational advocacy of feminist movements and human rights movements. And there are just so many strategies that they are using at an international level in international organizations, but a couple that I think are remarkable are the way that they are cutting back on financial resources. And this is prior to this new second term of Trump. This is coming before that. They also threaten international organizations that are working on gender equality, and they lobby for conservative candidates in human rights bodies. So they try to dismantle human rights bodies from the inside, and these are the bodies that also help develop more progressive laws at a national level. So they're doing a very comprehensive work, right? And especially in Latin America, my experience, we've seen them actually being successful at putting some of their candidates, more conservative candidates, at the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, at the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights, and at the same time, a lot of criticism and pushback from regional human rights organizations that are calling them out on what they are doing with the support of national governments. And I'm going to stop here, and then, well, thank you for remembering.
Right now, we'll hear from Brent Pooch. Brent Pooch is a human resources and organizational inclusion champion, reflecting their passion for creating excellent workplaces for employees to do their best work towards a better world. They are currently the Director of Talent, Equity and Culture at the Center for International Environmental Law, and previously have worked with USAID, Mercy Corps, and Portland State University. As a trans and queer activist, organizer, and researcher, they have been involved in various co-leadership roles at the Society of Gender Professionals since 2020, advocating for gender and LGBTQI+ justice within feminist movements and beyond. And they lead SGP's most prolific community of practice, the Breaking Gender and Sex Binary Circle. And I highly recommend everyone to learn about SGP circles and join these communities of practice, which have an amazing global footprint and just very, very organic collaborative discussions happen in these spaces. So over to you, Brent, for your remarks.
Thanks, Aparna. Great plug for the circles. Okay, so in terms of manifestation, I really wanted to underscore that the same, I will call biology ideology that is happening with, we're talking about women and girls, and then queer people, you can do your thing over here. It's the same thing. It's still punishing people, vilifying people based on breaking those like gender norms that are expected on their, sex assigned at birth. So we really need more solidarity between these movements. There's a lot of gender critical quote feminists who we often call TERFs, which stands for trans exclusionary radical feminists. People like J.K. Rowling or even Reem Al-Salam, who is the special rapporteur for the UN on violence against women and girls, extremely gender critical, constantly, just spewing this sort of like anti-trans rhetoric. And then despite like the obsession with sex that gender critical people have, they still completely erase intersex people who are nearly 2% of the population, just completely pretend that they don't exist. So there's just a lot of like the people, it's very frustrating because like women are oppressed by anti-gender and then they're turning around and doing it to queer and trans and intersex people. And then there's even this, these hierarchies and infighting within the LGBTQI+ community. There's still anti-transness, anti-intersex, anti-bisexual. So lots of layers. And so, yeah, really just like need that solidarity. In terms of a shift, it's also a shift and more just a continuation. One of the things in our consultation that somebody brought up was how much money conservative groups have, and they are investing in, changing the narratives and changing people in power in not just in the US, but across the world. So this happened in Uganda, right? It was an American Christian conservative organization sharing, like putting a shitload of money into that campaigning. And so they're really like messing with the world and targeting gender and sexuality. I will not even get started on the US administration because I have lots of feelings. And then in terms of impact, I wanted to focus specifically on like the intersection between queer, trans, intersex people and environment, because we're talking a bit about that here. So definitely more marginalization, as other folks have mentioned, and that leads to less resilience. So queer, trans, intersex people are more likely to live in disaster-prone areas, to live in polluted areas, so they have more health impacts, they have more homelessness, they have more reason to migrate, but actually it's harder for them to migrate across borders because their identification does not necessarily match their visual presentation, or there's lots of issues in many countries with that identification. There's, of course, in disaster responses, which Yemi had mentioned, there's often not a lot of LGBTQI+ sensitive responses. They are abused, discriminated against. People have to hide who they are in order to actually get support in these, humanitarian organizations. And yeah, a lot of those organizations will focus on like nuclear or legal families. So they're not prioritizing queer family. It's just like, okay, your child, your wife, whatever it is. And then there's less access to gender affirming care. When you are a climate refugee, when you are houseless, you don't have access to hormones or clothing or makeup or whatever. And then lastly, I will mention the divine retribution, which is a lot of conservative folks around the world, definitely in the US, will blame climate disasters on queer people or societies that support queer and trans people, saying like, oh, God is punishing everybody because you are destroying families or what have you. So lots of intersections there, and I will turn it back.
Thank you, Ben. Now we'll quickly dive into the second round of questions, and this is focused on the strategies and responses to anti-gender movements. So my question is, what strategies or successful initiatives have been implemented to counter anti-gender actors and movements in our panelists' area of expertise? How can and should we respond also to the DEI pullback that is impacting employment in the field of gender? What can or should we learn from the recent events about ways to sustain gender equality progress, be it more broadly across the field of gender or particularly in environmental spaces? And because we will not have time for a third round of questioning, I request all panelists to also include their call to action in this set of response. So what is something that our participants can do to counter anti-gender movements in their professional or personal lives? So we'll go to the virtual room again now, and I invite Srividya to share first, followed by Dr. Angelique, and followed by Gani. So feel free to take on the unmute Srividya.
Thank you.
And 4 minutes, 3 to 4 minutes max.
Sure. So again, I'm sharing the strategic responses and call to action that emerged from the consultations with the Ending Workplace Sexual Harassment circle members. We identified that this is a critical time for gender work, and coordinated and strategic response is most important than ever. And there are few key ways that we believe we should respond to. Firstly, we've found that engaging men is most important, giving men and boys an opportunity to think about their experiences of masculinities in a way that doesn't undermine women or girls, or for that matter, people with any gender identity. And finding new healthy way to express their masculinity, it is very critical in the years to come. I recollect my personal experience of delivering a workplace sexual harassment prevention session in one of the universities in India, and where a senior professor stood up middle of the session and started asking, what about men? What is the men's rights? I had to strategically find a way to engage how men's rights are also, women's rights are also men's rights as well. So by promoting healthier, equitable expressions of masculinity, where supporting feminist movements are not challenging or in any way challenging men's rights or their expression of masculinity, that way we can challenge harmful norms and build a future that is rooted in respect and justice. We also believe that it will be critical to work with faith leaders, where some are perpetuating harm, as we see. There are also faith leaders who are seeking out to help. Some of our members from SGP are working in Sierra Leone and Zimbabwe to transform masculinities in partnership with faith leaders and change makers. They have created these discussion circles where men can tackle cultural and normative barriers for advancing gender justice. We see that with the right approach, faith leaders, they can create positive change instead of perpetuating harm. Moving forward, we also understand securing new funding sources will be very essential to offset these government cuts. We can no longer depend upon particularly right-wing governments to support for the work what we know as vital. Instead, we must seek funding from philanthropies, impact investors, individual donors, and build a collective future where critical efforts can continue and thrive. So we want to emphasize the focus on collective action. We cannot be a society that passively watches anti-gender movements gain momentum and protection for women, girls, and marginalized communities are systematically dismantled. We must hold an unwavering face and show and demonstrate our commitment to this. We need to recover the lost ground, and our peers have worked decades to build this, and together we think we can forge a future for gender justice and eliminate gender-based violence. Elimination of gender-based violence is not an aspiration, but let's make it a reality. Thank you.
Dr. Angelique, you may share your remarks next.
Thank you. I will try to do this as quickly as possible. Just building on a really important point is that we need to note in our strategies, and the strategies that I've seen across the Caribbean and in Trinidad and Tobago, is that we have to also uncover the ways that these anti-gender movements are funded and fueled by conservative, global north located conservative organizations, and we can trace this again for years that this has been happening. Organizations such as Agenda Europe and World Congress of Families that have had conferences in the Caribbean. So I want to highlight that and say that therefore the impacts of these movements and how we respond, we've had to counter all of those, uncover and counter. And so the new strategies of resistance, I think we've seen, we mobilize around local and regional knowledge. And that also comes in terms of my teaching. I want to say just one thing about teaching is that increasingly over the last few years, we have to do so much more work in teaching and talking about gender, sex, and sexuality and showing the intersections, talking about what's happening with the climate and our ecological systems. We have to make those connections. And so that is something that is a strategy. And we have to root our work in, again, local, regional, and global South knowledge and activism. And then for CAISO Sex and Gender Justice, we're a feminist LGBTQI+ organization, and we've seen the direct impacts on our community members. And one of the things that we've done since 2020 is that we provided services through our homeless and justice program, and we respond to violations, offering legal, psychosocial, and wholeness development services. And through this work, we've been able to produce data, having evidence-based advocacy through our insights report, and we provide policy recommendations. And since 2022, our program has noted an increase in public forms of violence against community members as a direct impact of the anti-gender movements on LGBTQI+ people living in Trinidad and Tobago. And so we've steadily had to produce public education, campaigns and resources, engage with media to counter misinformation. And we've had to develop new strategies of resistance along the way. And so I want to tell you about two such projects, and I'll put them in the link. One is called Educate to Empower, which raises awareness about the unique experiences faced by LGBTQI+ youth and their families and guardians. And we created resource guides that foster a culture of compassion, understanding, and inclusivity rooted in facts rather than fear or myth. It's grounded in our evidence-based research, studies of Caribbean gender and sexuality, diverse genders and sexualities, and intersectional analysis. And we shared these resources through PDFs, through videos, through social media infographics. We have the guides available in Spanish, English, and reader immersion, as well as soon to be launched videos in Trinidad and Tobago Sign Language. So, just showing that we have to also be rooted in disability justice. And finally, I want to share our latest campaign, Inclusive Futures, which responds directly to anti-gender and anti-rights discourses and misinformation about LGBTQI+ people. And we have broadly wanting to address some of the misconceptions. And so the campaign uses local and regional research and knowledge and engages a decolonial, feminist, and sex-positive approach. And it's a series of videos, social media, and a fact sheet, and I will put that up for us. And I think this is a prime example of what our strategies need to be. And of course, we also need to, in our work, we absolutely prioritize the intersections of gender and climate justice as a part of our work, and prioritizing the voices of those most marginalized and impacted, including trans and intersex people and young people who need to be at the center of our transformation. This is also a part of my research, which I won't have time to talk about today, but I want to leave everyone with my call to action, which is that one of the most important things that I think we can do to counter in our professional and personal lives is that we have to challenge misinformation at every point. If someone comes to us with, misinformation, we have to challenge it. We have to encourage and challenge any misleading ideas about sex, gender, sexuality, human rights, the climate, disability, migration, all of it. And also sharing information and encouraging folks, let's do our own research. Offer guidance on how to investigate, find reliable sources and organizations to learn, encourage people to join movements. Now more than ever, we have to forge alliances across our differences. We must build meaningful solidarities and stay informed. We need strategic, social, and environmental justice movements, and they have to be intersectional. They have to be respectful of our differences and be willing to learn from each other. And we must be guided by those most marginalized and on the front lines of crisis, especially those in the global South. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gavin, please share your I guess, strategies and call to action.
Okay, thank you. So in the context of Barbados, from the constitutional reform process till now, we had to prove that discrimination existed. We were told by some people with political power and leadership that LGBTQ individuals don't get discriminated against. So what we had to do was gather credible insights. This was through partnership with some UE professors, and also with some other agencies that could build credibility on our behalf. So we had to prove that LGBTQ individuals were discriminated against, but also we had to bring forward at least 500 survey respondents to show teeth in what we were talking about. And then through that, we were able to present that information to them, and then they said, oh, this might actually be a problem. In terms of from the environmental perspective, this one has been the most challenging for me in that there are various mechanisms involved for the public to get involved in shifting or improving laws and policies, but they're not easily accessible. We have a transparency issue in Barbados and certainly in the Caribbean. And so what I did through my organization was send emails, write letters, make phone calls, and I would get ignored all the time. It's only when I attended the conference of the parties on 2 occasions, they saw my face in person and they were like, oh yeah, you could come and make some contributions to our nationally determined contributions, or you could be a part of the national adaptation processes. And I really think it speaks to the fact that I had to leave Barbados in order to be given some level of involvement in this processes. And we see that many individuals, I consider myself youth, LGBTQ, et cetera, we have to go through very extreme processes to be involved. However, I would consider these success stories. So I hope that my presence and the presence of others can then lead to more engagement from a political level. I have many other things I want to say, but one thing I would like to mention now is that Barbados is a non-ODA country, which means that we don't get access to large funding. So that means that any grassroots human rights work that you see being done on a ground level, most of people do it pro bono, myself included. So we see that there's a lot of burnout among activists in this space. And it also makes it difficult to have consistent funding to sustain long-term progress. So, how do we sustain progress despite uncertainty? And I have a list of things that I want to discuss. So for the individuals here, academics, experts, et cetera, you need to support movements directly within affected countries. I know that there's a need to have a broad stroke, but sometimes going to specific localities and specific groups might be a better, might offer grassroots organizations. And then the use of practical measures. Yes, retweeting stuff, reposting things, doing a video is helpful, but we need people who are willing to put pen to paper and offer assistance with building capacity internally. Do organizations need assistance with SOPs? Do they need assistance writing policy briefs? Do they need assistance designing studies and surveys? What practical, physical ways can you lend your help? Another thing is, instead of consulting with marginalized groups or grassroots organizations, why not partner? Slap their name on a study, include them in a meaningful way, because then this also helps them with their scale and their reach, but it could also help them get involved in the process in a more meaningful way, because they are their own experts. I am a youth. I might be the youngest person on the panel right now, and I think it's important to include the youth, and include the youth in such a way that you also offer succession planning. So all the skills that you're learning, find somebody who's willing, and I don't like the use of the word mentorship, but the youth really want to be involved, and we need to have people who are willing to show us the way in practical ways. And I really do appreciate Lisa for including me where possible. That's really, really helpful. And I think some of the other panelists touched on this before, but standing firm in our beliefs and the movements we're involved in is critical. We need to be able to stand firm in spite or while there's pressure to compromise, especially if we're being funded and supported by external organizations who may not want us to lend our voice. So I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jim. We're so grateful to have you on the panel today. All right, so we are moving on to our panelists in the room now. So Bren, you can go first, and then Violetta, your ideas for strategies and call to action.
Thanks, Verna. Mine were kind of combined anyways. One of the strategies I recently learned in a workshop by Yafa, who is a trans Palestinian activist, is around these sort of 3 buckets of activism, and it really stuck with me. So there's the system change that is being within the system or working on it outside of it, but really working to change what's currently here. The second one is system transformation, which can be dismantling. Like we need to get rid of some of the harmful systems we have now. And then the third bucket is building alternative systems. And we need people in each of those. And some of you might be in 2 or even 3 of those at different phases in your life or at different times. But it is really important to find your corner, find what you can do. Not everybody has to be on the front lines organizing protests. I like supporting from behind the scenes. I love spreadsheets. I'm in human resources. I'm in DEI. And so there is a space for everyone in these movements fighting back. Integrating queerness, transness, LGBTQI+ voices into your daily lives and your work. In terms of DEI, it's, just don't hide. I know sometimes people need to hide, but as much as you can, do not preemptively comply. That is happening a lot, at least in the US. And don't abandon data collection. I mean, do it ethically, but like LGBTQI+ people, we exist. There's something called paper genocide, which I recently learned about actually in this consultation with Breaking Binaries, which is eliminating historical records, which is exactly what colonization did, and it's still happening. Also, if you've heard of Agnes Hirschfeld in Berlin at the beginning of the Nazi regime, exactly, they burned everything. And so just, keep us on the forefront, integrate us, have solidarity within those movements of anti-gender, and not just talking about women and girls.
Thank you, Bren.
Well, considering the strategies and responses that we can have, I'm thinking about 2 levels. First of all, as feminist movements, and also based on research in Latin America, it is crucial to have strong feminist movements. And that means that not only resources, not only in matter of resources, but also strong feminist movements that are working in networks across the country and not only being centralized just in the capital or just in certain big cities, but across the entire country. And these strong feminist movements, they can mobilize public opinion, and that is very successful. That's a very successful strategy because they can mobilize public opinion not only formally, but also informally. There are so many ways to use communication strategies. And very important is to be prepared. These movements have to be prepared to take advantage of the opportunity windows that are gonna happen, because right now, maybe we're gonna see a lot of pushback, but being ready to take advantage of an opportunity window when the moment comes, that is crucial. And at the same time, push and support for more women in decision-making spaces and more diverse people in decision-making spaces. This will not by itself mean that they will be progressive, but it will also create an opening for more gender advancing or gender supporting norms. And lastly, it's important to build alliances in unexpected places, because maybe you don't think that that person that you, and that happens to me a lot, the person that I thought that was a very conservative person might be able or open to support you or your movement in ways that you are not expecting. And very briefly, also talking on the consultation that we had with the Employment and Peer Support Circle that I co-lead at the Society of Gender Professionals. One new strategy that we've seen that is happening now from anti-gender movements is that I talked about how they impact things at the national level and at the international level, but another new strategy is that they are impacting the private sector with the dismantling of DEI, the prohibition of words, and the threatening with lawsuits and so on, so on. So it's also very important that we create and we sustain peer support systems. If they are in place there already, we should strengthen them. If they are not in place, we should find ways to find support. It's fundamental that if we feel weak individually, we will feel better. We can do more collectively. I think that the word collective, working as a collective, has been crucial around this conversation today. And one thing that also came often from our consultations is that we should also prioritize rest and joy to support long-term resilience and activism. And I think that is as well crucial. As much as we're gonna fight, as much as we're gonna struggle, we should also find room for joy to have a resilient and long-term sustainable resistance. And that's how I'm closing my remarks today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Violetta. And I wanted to remind us that we will create a report from today's event and include insights and links that our panelists are sharing, and maybe also get our panelists to include any points there that they were not able to make during today's discussion due to lack of time. We also held 3 other events in the series of countering and understanding and countering anti-gender movements at SGP in the last 2 years, and you'll find a brochure at the back with QR codes to the recordings and reports. Yeah, and I really wanted to acknowledge our fabulous audience here today, the 80+ people who are online, who've stayed online throughout the event, and the amazing audience in this room. Thank you for being here and listening to us, and being engaged in this very critical topic. So I also want to thank all the volunteers at SGP and SAEDI Consulting. It's been such a joy to create this event to get together for many, it has taken many volunteers and many hours. In the final 10 minutes, we will take some thoughts from the online room and this room. And I have very kindly received some questions from the online room. So Anya has a question where they're asking, the panelists are sharing their experiences in advocacy, consulting, and nonprofit sector. What forms of collaboration, support, or inputs do you seek from colleagues and friends in academia? I'm going to share the 3 questions. We've selected 3 questions, and I'll pose them together, and then I'll request our panelists to respond to the one that calls to them the most. Then Kessel, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, has a question where they're asking, for those of us who are educators in gender studies, what do you recommend as a way of teaching our students, particularly those outside our disciplines, about the importance of learning about and combating anti-gender movements or policies? And finally, Taylor has a question. Are there any specific reports on LGBTQ, specifically trans and gender non-conforming individuals, on student literacy and longevity? I know there are reports on binary genders. How can we use data on statistical impacts on their academic achievement and longevity? So I'll go to the panelists in maybe the virtual room first to see if you would like to address any of these questions. You can unmute yourself and share.
I'll dive in because I think the question around educators in gender studies, I straddle multiple worlds. I'm an activist. I lead a civil society organization, and I'm also a lecturer and teach and do research in gender and sexuality studies. And so I think those bridges are absolutely important in my work. I'm an activist first. And so my work as a researcher is guided by what is happening on the ground and what's happening in community. And I think that that's how it should be, but I recognize that that's not always how it works. And I think there's ways that academia actually encourages us not to do that. And so we actually have to fight against that. And I think we need it now even more than ever. I mean, we've needed it for a long time. But I think also in the Caribbean, and I think this is across the global South, people have straddled multiple paths and multiple fields. And sometimes we have to separate parts of ourselves as we show up. Like sometimes I'm asked to show up in this way and I have to show up in a different way. So I think we actually have to do more to push against that and join forces and show that we are aligned. And in fact, so much, and you'll hear Caribbean feminist scholars say this all the time, that a lot of our scholarship and theorizing comes from what's happening on the ground. So there is no separation, and we see this across, global South articulations of feminism and feminist activism. And so I think that that's it's absolutely necessary. So if it's not happening, we need to make sure it happens, and let's actually hold each other accountable on that. So I think that's what I'm thinking about that. And I also just want to say that it's absolute that we are that our strategies then have to be really infused with that kind of energy, right? And I think that's a part of what I've heard from everyone, right? Our strategizing and also the specificity of the local. And I appreciate what Yemi said about that we also need to have that context. We must have the local and the regional context in terms of the work that we do.
Thank you so much, Angelique. Brent, Violetta, would you like to address any of the questions?
I was observing that they kind of, I think, support one another. So asking around support from academia and reports on LGBTQI plus literacy and longevity. I think that academia has funding and it has the power. Maybe you're not a specific like LGBTQI plus study done, but if you are studying literacy or education or whatever, you can collect data and look at, sure, women and men and girls and boys, but also like, what about trans people? What about queer people? So like incorporating that into, I think the sort of average everyday work that you're doing is one way to expand the knowledge in the field, and that a way that we can get support from academia, and then of course working with, collaborating with civil society organizations and activists and ask us for help and opinions and to come to your classes and such.
Thank you, Brian. So turning it to this room, would anyone like to share any questions or comments? Yes.
Hi, I'm Isabella Griffin, and I'm from Lehigh University representing them today.
Do you want to come here?
I can. So the people in this room can hear you. Should I just like stand right here?
Yeah.
Okay. It's awkward, good. So I just had a question about college institutions, given the state of uncertainty around them right now, and a few of them, even my own, are being investigated for, doing some activism. How do we go about continuing to advocate for these groups and continuing to be a member of, these these gender movements? How do we continue doing that when our institutions might, are under fire? Yeah.
Big question. Wait, like how you pass it to me?
The one person who is not based in the US. So no, I say that too many. No, it's a good question. I think part of this is how it just shows us how mutable the law is and how open to interpretation it is. Why are you under fire for being investigated? Because there are varying interpretations of what the law says. And I'm curious about what free speech actually means. That to me is kind of like one of the most ironic and funny things about this current period, that the free speech people are the ones that are denying speech. So I think it's important, where you can to stand your ground, because this is only the first album. Even if you bend and you twist and you compromise, I'm sure there'll be something else. And so I know it's easy to say when I'm not here, but if you look at history and history prologue, you will see that bending and compromising has actually not been a long-term and sustainable strategy. And all it does is actually encourage more. And so I would say find some good legal minds, find a nice narrow slice you can stand on, and don't move on it no matter what comes, would be my suggestion. I think the other thing also is to think about what's driving the attack and think about what your counter attack's gonna be. There's always a counter argument, and if you talk to lawyers, and I don't talk to that many, but most lawyers say there's always a counter argument to everything, even when the other side has all the facts on their side. We have to think the same way. If you have to think about how all of this came about, I was even thinking about some of the transgender bias and bathroom stuff, and I'm like, wait a minute, I recall, if my memory is sound, that there was not even a discussion on bathrooms. The bathroom situation was created, then a movement followed it, then money followed it, and then policies about the counter policy came up, and that was the track. And then once there was the counter policy, then came the aha moment, and suddenly there was a reason for something that was actually created out of nothing. Lessons we have to learn from this. We really have to sit down and perhaps be very critical ourselves and really kind of understand what is driving it in order to be able to navigate this space. But I certainly would think that it would be very disheartening and very troublesome if we're squashing youth engagement in societal issues, if we're squashing youth activism. Well, if that happens, who's going to pick up after us? I'm planning on retiring and at least quasi-retiring and enjoying some mint juleps on the beach sometime soon, as I tell my team all the time. So I'm encouraging them to do this. So I also think that not just collective action, but camaraderie. So you're not alone. There's lots of people out there. And so when you're feeling down, please go online or go into a WhatsApp or find other people, including people who are not in the US, by the way. There are people who are supporting you, who understand the pain you're going through, who perhaps have gone through this already and have lessons that you're not aware of. So I also think be strategic also in looking to think about your ecosystem is not just in front of you. There's a global ecosystem out there that you may be able to benefit from. And that was what I could come up with in no time.
Can I add something to that? Great. I just want to also say to the young people in the room, student organizers as well, that located in the United States, that there's so much to learn from the global South. There's so much to learn, right? So look for inspiration in ways that help to fuel and to also hold power accountable. And so I just really want to encourage you to do that. I love the stand your ground. Let's reclaim that. And also, yeah, we don't have time to be neutral. There's no time to be neutral, and we are literally fighting for our lives. And so I just want to encourage you to be strong, but also take care of yourselves and be rooted in healing and care.
Thank you so much, Angelique. Yemi, Vidya, any final thoughts from Yemi, Vidya, any final thoughts from both of you? All right.
No, I feel like everybody summarized everything that I could have possibly said so well. So it's just a pleasure to be here. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I agree. But quickly, everybody talks about academia. Everybody talks about campuses. My work mostly is in private workspaces, and obviously, as a person who deals with complaints of sexual harassment directly, I feel a lot of solidarity and a lot of support needs to go to those people who highlight the problems that exist in workplaces and brace themselves to give a formal complaint. It's a really, really struggling process when you want to hold on to your job at the same time you want to raise a complaint. Yeah, we also need to forge strategic ways to create interventions in public and private workspaces as well. So I just wanted to highlight that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're at the end of
working across labor movements. Sorry, I just have to say, you inspired me to make sure that we are active in our labor movement organizing. That's a part of that cross solidarity building, because that brings in working people and working issues. And that's really important. I mean, in Global South, we've been doing that. So again, I think that's another lesson and work that continues. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. What a stellar panel. What an important discussion. And solidarity, community are common themes. And I would say SGP is a great place to find global community. We have members from almost 80 countries in the network.
who are meeting every month, who are meeting regularly, creating a community to take action with and to learn from each other. And everyone has expertise, not just from their academic or practitioner credentials, from their lived experiences. So I'd say join SGP. We are extremely accessible in terms of the membership dues. You can become a member by paying value of 1 meal in your local context, and scholarships are available as well. So absolutely look forward to seeing you at in the SGP spaces. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So
great.
Are these business cards?
Thanks, everyone. Online.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's been great. We're so happy to sit right now.
I'm happy, despite the lack of coffee, that I was able to do that.
I probably had twice the amount I needed to. Yeah.
I'll be understanding about yes.
Thank you for coming, everyone. Please give us 1 minute.